There has been a devastating attack in Afghanistan. 63 people are dead and 182 wounded after a suicide bomb was detonated at a wedding celebration in the capital of Kabul. ISIS is taking responsibility for the attack, saying it was targeting Shia Muslims. CNN's Becky Anderson has more, and we do want to warn you, this report is disturbing.
A pile of victims' shoes, blood coating chairs, all in a shattered banquet hall. In Afghanistan's unending maelstrom of violence, this is how weddings can end.
I've lost hope. I lost my brother and my friends who came to join my wedding party.
The day after his wedding party, the groom recounts what happened when a suicide bomber snuck in and detonated a massive bomb that had been strapped to his body, shaking the neighborhood.
I was in the wedding party when a blast occurred. It was very powerful, and the situation was terrible.
We were sitting in our home when the strong sound of the blast came up. We came to the site of the blast, and I saw that many women and children were screaming and crying. Many martyrs and injured people were transferred by the ambulances, and it was a really terrible situation.
It's not unfamiliar. In Afghanistan, death is a familiar business. Murdered by terrorism at night, the next morning, families already burying their dead. As the wounded, badly hurt, struggle to cling to life in dilapidated hospitals. While Afghans suffer through the bloodshed, the politics of finger-pointing goes on. The Taliban, condemning the attack, deny any involvement. But Afghanistan's president insists the group must share in the blame, saying, quote, they provide a platform for terrorists. And later, as it often does, ISIS claiming responsibility, but offering no evidence. This latest episode of violence, horrific but unsurprising as it is, comes as peace talks seem on the cusp of coming together. America could be about to agree to pulling out its forces. The deal is supposedly meant to be finalised in the coming days. Yet it is unclear what that will mean for ordinary people. The country is riven by religious and political factions, flooded with weapons, not to mention battle-hardened fighters, all after nearly 20 years of American involvement. So the only thing that seems certain, looking ahead, is that these will be far from the last innocent deaths in Afghanistan. Becky Anderson, CNN, London.
And this weekend's attack comes as the Trump administration dials up peace talks with the Taliban, as Becky outlined, and the president himself says he wants U.S. troops to be out of the country. But Lindsey Graham, a Trump ally and member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, is pushing back on that idea.
Every national security advisor for President Trump is recommending unanimously that if we do a peace agreement with the Taliban, we must maintain the ability to have a counterterrorism force with intel capability as long as conditions on the ground warrant. The idea of leaving at a date certain is a disaster for the United States because ISIS and al-Qaeda will regenerate.
I want to bring in Lieutenant General Mark Hurling. He is a former Army commanding general and Daily Beast contributor, and CNN Global Affairs analyst Kim Dozier. Good to see you both. So, General, is a quick pullout from Afghanistan with a clear timetable a good idea?
Well, with a clear timetable with some conditions, yes, conditions-based, that would be a very good idea. We've been fighting this war for 19 years. But you're going to see over the next couple of weeks, Fred, there's going to be debate on both sides. Many people are going to be saying it's the longest war ever, we've got to get out, whereas others will say we have to leave some kind of residual force, as Senator Graham said, some type of counterterrorism force. And that's critically important. We don't know the details of what's been negotiated with Ambassador Khalilzad and the Taliban. Whatever it was certainly a complex negotiation because he had to deal with a force, the Taliban, a government entity, if you will, that's growing in strength, as well as an Afghan government that hasn't been part of those deliberations, that's declining in strength and with a lack of a security force. So there has to be some type of counterterrorism potential within Afghanistan, and the only one that can provide that is the United States, not only with shooters, but also with intelligence.
And so, Kim, a peace deal with the Taliban would include, a ceasefire, but the Taliban is fractured. The Afghan government hasn't really been part of the negotiations. So could any peace deal really happen?
Well, from my own reporting, a peace deal is close, but not in a form that most people would recognize it. The ceasefire will be selective. Taliban contacts have told me they won't fire on U.S. troops who are packing up and leaving. But if they're U.S. troops who are still staying and patrolling, they're fair game. Afghan National Security Forces are fair game. And at the heart of it, what still needs to be decided in the coming days or weeks in Doha, where the talks are going to take place again, is the size of that counterterrorism force if it stays at all. People like Senator Graham have stressed to President Trump, who has made it known to Ambassador Khalilzad, that there is a concern that U.S. should not agree to wrap up all of its counterterrorism forces along with its conventional forces sometime next year. But from the Taliban's point of view, they can't sit down for the next round of talks with the Afghan government and others until they tell their followers, we have secured the departure of all foreign troops. And then on top of all of that, Ambassador Khalilzad has been trying to reassure people, Afghans, Europeans, and officials here, don't worry. In a few months' time, if we're in the middle of packing up and the Taliban aren't honoring the agreement they made with us, we can freeze all this and turn it around. There are a lot of skeptics who think this president isn't going to do that.
So then, General Hertling, if the majority of the troops are pulled out and there are some that remain, how does the size, how do you determine the correct size of that force?
You don't, Fred, and that's a key point. I'd like to bring up another piece. There are about 14,000 U.S. forces in Afghanistan, and the rumor has been, will they draw down to between 8,000 and 9,000 or completely withdraw? That's not considering there's also about 17,000 partner forces from 39 different NATO nations that are conducting training. They're going to be watching what the U.S. does. If the U.S. pulls out completely, they will pull out completely, and it'll be Katie bar the door at that point. Kim brings up an interesting point as part of the dynamics of the negotiation. The Taliban saying, hey, if the American troops are packing up and we see them doing that, we won't shoot at them, but everyone else is fair game. How do you tell that on the ground? Having commanded forces on the ground, I'll tell you, you just don't throw up your hands and say, hey, I'm not doing anything, I'm just packing, leave me alone. It will be massively confusing on the ground for the warring forces. Then you also have the dynamic between are these Taliban forces in conjunction with Afghan security and government against the United States? Is there confusion? Does the Afghan government think that we have actually thrown them under a bus to a degree by dealing only with the Taliban? There are all sorts of complex dynamics to this that haven't been addressed real well.
All right, General Mark Hertling, Kim Dozier, thanks to both of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.